3, 2, 1. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Hanging with Janky. So here's a fun story. While I was on vacation, I got this Jaws-themed mug that says, "We're going to need a bigger boat." And I was really happy with it when I bought it, but I am now realizing it is literally the most inconvenient mug I own to drink out of. So that's a fun thing to learn. Anyway, friends, welcome back to another week of gaming news with me, Janky Shenanigans. Let's hop right into it, shall we? First off, let's talk about Hulu, who is diving into the eSports scene. So as I'm sure you've noticed, eSports has become much more prominent in the public eye over the past couple of years, with big networks like ESPN dedicating a lot of time and effort into supporting eSports and covering them. Twitch, of course, always having eSport tournaments being streamed, and even more conventional networks like the CW airing eSport tournaments in primetime slots. And now, Hulu is joining the fray. So Hulu has partnered with ESL, that's the Electronic Sports League, to produce 4 new shows for their service, which include Player vs. Player, a gamified debate show featuring shoutcasters and influencers arguing with each other for points. It kind of sounds like that one show that already exists on ESPN. I cannot think of the name of it because I don't get ESPN, but there is one that kind of exists that's like that, but it's basically a whole bunch of people debating about news and sports and players and stats and things. So that's one show coming up. They also have one called Boot Camp, which will follow the Immortals, a CSGO team, and kind of show you the inner workings of how esports teams actually work. There will be one called Defining Moments. It says a kind of news magazine. I kind of picture it like a Right This Minute situation, or like a BuzzFeed kind of thing, or TMZ kind of thing, where they just cover great moments in esports for the week or whatever. And then one final that's called ESL Replay, a documentary-style roundup of 4 major ESL tournaments created within 1 week of the live event. So that will be more of a documentary style, showing you the tournament and probably some of what's going on backstage and all of that. I think it's cool that Hulu would like to make these shows. I think it will definitely expand the viewer base for esports. Not that esports doesn't have a huge player base already, because of course fans of the games that are at the tournaments are going to be watching these esport tournaments. But I do think going, for lack of a better word, I want to say more conventional with these shows, like they are, like a debate show, a documentary, a behind the scenes, a defining moments, kind of doing what people do with more conventional sports right now. I think that it will bring it more into the public eye. I think it will gain esports a lot more viewership. And it'll just be interesting to see how things go for these new shows for Hulu. So that's super cool. Next up on the list, let's talk about Oculus and the 2 new things they recently showed off at Oculus Connect, the Oculus Go and the Oculus Santacruz. So VR, that's another huge thing that's been going on over the past couple of years, right? You have the Oculus Rift, you have the HTC Vive, you have things like the Gear VR, the Google cardboard box thing, the off-brand one-offs, the PlayStation VR, all of these machines that have either you have to hook it up to a computer or a console, or you just plug in your phone and you experience VR. So this has been huge. And of course, Oculus, being one of the first sort of big pioneering companies in this new medium, has been working very hard to create standalone VR experiences that don't need the phone or the computer or anything like that, and that's what they wanted to show off at the Oculus Connect conference this year. So the first announcement that everyone was super jazzed for is the Oculus Go, which is a standalone headset, so all of the hardware is built right in, and it's comparable to the mobile headsets that people get today, the kind that you can just plug in your phone and play. Obviously, you don't need a phone for that one because all the hardware is built right in, but people are very excited for it, not in the least because it will only be $200, which sounds pricey, but for most VR experiences, that's actually relatively cheap, especially when you consider the price of the Oculus Rift, although that has been cut recently. But let's get back around to the Oculus Go and what it's all about. Now, I will say I was reading some articles on Gama Sutra the other day from VR developers who were talking about the Oculus Go, and the one thing that they brought up was that it only has 3 degrees of movement, which means you can move your head in any direction you like, but it can't actually track your head in the space, which means that leaning in, leaning out, crouching down, moving up, they're kind of pointless endeavors with this thing, because it can't track you like that, which is a shame because that's sort of something that's really starting to creep its way into these mobile headsets. That's something that actually another team is working on. I believe it actually might be HTC Vive. Don't quote me on that. I'd have to look it up. But they are looking at adding 6 degrees of freedom to these mobile headsets, which means that they'll actually be able to track you in the space, which could make Oculus go a little behind the times when it does release. However, the other announcement that they made that people are super excited for is the Oculus Santacruz, which is super cool. Now, the one thing about the Oculus Santacruz is that it does have those 6 degrees of freedom, which means it can track you in the space. However, it is in prototype stages right now, which means it is very, very, very not close to releasing. We're looking at like 2019. The other thing is that even though it is a standalone headset, it's still running on the mobile chip. So obviously it's not going to have as much power as something that's actually hooked up to a computer, which it's going to be a trade-off because you're not going to have cables to trip over, and chips will get more powerful for mobile devices, but it's going to have less processing power than, you know, something that's actually hooked up to a computer. So that'll be something too. Either way, I think this is a really cool development in VR, and I know that HTC Vive is also working on some sort of standalone headset of their own, so I think we're going to see a trend of even more easily accessible VR to everyone in the future. Is that a good thing? Well, that's a debate for another time. So let's get to the meaty story of the day and talk about the big controversy happening this week, the loot boxes in Shadow of War. So there is a game that recently released known as Shadow of War. It is a sequel to the game Shadow of Mordor. It's set in Middle-earth in like the time in between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and what was going on at that time and all this interesting stuff. And basically, Warner Brothers, who developed the game, decided to add in a loot box system into this single-player RPG, and people were not feeling it. So I actually haven't played Shadow of War, so basically all I can really draw my opinion from is what people have written about the game and what I've seen other people play in the game. But basically the big controversy is that the game is fine up until the last few stages, whenever there's a series of incredibly challenging fights, and unless you spent a lot of time grinding and building up skill and building up an army before you go into these final challenges, they are almost impossible to beat without getting the gold level loot boxes, or war chests, whatever they're called in the game, and you have to spend gold to get them, and gold is really, really rare in the game, but very, very easy to buy. Now, I could make an entire episode just about loot boxes and how I feel about them, but I'm going to boil it down to my basic opinion, which is I don't really like loot boxes for the most part, because I think that at heart, they're made to make you buy them. And that's because loot boxes at the base level play on a gambler's mentality, which is you open a loot box, you're going to get a set of random items. You probably have one in mind that you really, really want. If you don't get it in that loot box, you're going to think to yourself, oh, well, I can buy another loot box and maybe it will be in that one. And it's that sort of risk-reward adrenaline rush that loot boxes basically run themselves on, is that you're constantly putting faith in RNG. It's the gambler's fallacy, right? You think, oh, it's not in this one, so odds are it'll be in the next one, when really the odds are the same no matter what loot box you open. So I just don't like loot boxes as a system, because they are literally designed psychologically to make you keep buying them. But then again, there's a lot of other arguments we could have. This would actually be a really great discussion for a round table. but I don't do roundtables on this show, so I guess we'll have to do that some other way, some other time, in some other time and space. But yeah, it's a weird issue that's going on right now. I would love to hear your opinions if you have them. Feel free to leave those in the comments down below, and we can talk about it more at a later date. So that's what I have to say about the loot box system, and I'd love to hear what you think too. But talking about loot boxes and controversial systems, let's talk about Super Mario Odyssey and amiibo content. Don't worry, this story is actually quick and pretty good. Nintendo announced that all of the content that is locked behind amiibos in Super Mario Odyssey will actually be available for purchase to anyone who just wants it in the game. So, you don't have to find the amiibo, you don't have to buy the little amiibos, you don't have to plug them in. You can just be like, yo, I just want that sweet DLC content, and just buy it outright. Now there is a system I can get behind. Hey, check this news out. The co-founders of Riot Games, Brandon Beck and Mark Merrill, are getting back into game development. So have you ever asked yourself the question, why is Riot Games called Riot Games? They only have one. It's League of Legends. They have literally made only one game. The studio should just be called Riot Game. Well, the co-founders apparently agree with you because they are getting back into game development on a brand new project, unannounced. Who knows what they're working on. They might have just decided, yo, let's just figure something out and start a new game. But they are finally putting the S in Riot Games. They are making something new, and that's cool. That is literally the whole story. I was just super excited to say that they were putting the S in Riot Games because that is such a clever line, and I really enjoy it, and I was really happy to say it. But yeah, that's cool. I'm excited to see what they're up to and what they might do in the future. So let's round out the day like we always do, which is thanking new subscribers. We now have 310 members of the Jank Squad, which is totally awesome. So let's get thanking some new members, starting with Yorkshire Gamers. Y'all are so cute. Thank you so much for becoming part of the Jank Squad, and I hope that you enjoy being here. Also, thank you to Ono Donut. Donut, you are super cool and awesome and amazing, and keep being you. And finally, thanking the Old Cranky Gamer. Thank you so much, Old Cranky, for joining up with the Jank Squad. You're super cool. Thank you so much. Now, of course, I know that this is not all the people I have to thank, because I think last week we were at like 301. So this is all that YouTube is telling me to thank. So of course, if I missed you, please let me know so that I can thank you next time. But of course, thank you to all 310 members of the Jank Squad. Y'all are totally awesome, totally cool. I'm so glad to have you around. Thank you so much. I love you all. And that is all I have this week for Hanging with Janky. So thank you all for joining me. I hope you guys liked it. If you did, feel free to leave those likes down below. Comments, positive or negative, feel free to leave those below as well. More than anything, I hope you have a lovely day, evening, or whatever you happen to be watching. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, this is Janky Shenanigans, signing out.